The movie is titled Spring in Seoul. The movie doesn't show spring, and the season is winter. The content of the movie is also more like winter than spring. It's a movie that shows a historical fact that was quite important in Korea. It's been covered in dramas, but not really in movies. In terms of the past, Park Chung-hee is often covered. It's fair to say that Chun Do-won has never been covered, and that's probably because he's not alive today. In Korea, it's called the 12-12 incident, or the 12-12 military rebellion. Usually, when a rebellion is successful, it's called a revolution. It's called a crisis or a rebellion even though it was clearly successful, which means that what they did at the time was wrong. As you can see from the movie, there's no justification for what they did. The biggest failure was that the soldiers were confronting the enemy and they took the troops out of the area for their own safety. At the time, they were able to pull off the coup because of that. The movie is directed by Kim Sung-soo, and in interviews, he said he wanted to make it as if he lived through that period. There are no assumptions in history, it's already happened, and even then, a lot of people don't understand why they did what they did at the time. Because if they had acted differently, history would have changed completely. What Kim Jae-gyu did is a mystery, because what he did after doing such a huge thing was so weak. Obviously, it wasn't anarchy, but someone must have seen a loophole and decided that if they reached out a little bit more, they could grab it. Whether or not you do it has a lot to do with your greed for power. You always say that you have to do it for the sake of the country. I always say I did it because the country needed me. I don't know if the country called me or I called the country. The movie boils down to two main characters, and they explain things rather simply. It's actually a nice thing to watch because it simplifies something that would otherwise be too complicated. Instead of using real names, everyone created characters with pseudonyms. Wang Yung-min as Jeon-do Kwang and Yung Woo-sung as Lee Tae-shin represent the two characters. They both worked together in Kim Sung-soo's previous film, Asura. In Yung Woo-sung's case, he's been with Kim Sung-soo since Beat, which became a legend. They're in their 20s and now in their 50s. Yung Woo-sung's role is one that he always loses under Kim Sung-soo, which is somewhat due to the mask he has. The movie is quite exciting. It doesn't seem to be a clear-cut, good versus evil movie. Of course, when you get to the end, it's clear who the bad guy is. But the director deliberately put in subtitles because he didn't want the audience to be confused. By subtitling it, it makes it clearer for people who probably don't know much about 12-12 to make a judgment call. This is something that history has already verified. Jeon-do Kwang is ambitious and Lee Tae-sik is fair. Their differences lead to different outcomes in the end. When you watch a movie, you often don't understand why people act the way they do. People who are supposed to be generals stumble around, unable to make a decision, perhaps because they put their own safety first. It's the difference between someone who is determined to make a decision and someone who is just trying to deal with something that came out of nowhere. Jeon-do Kwang creates a situation where there is no way out and goes straight for it. If you don't win here, you lose here, and you're in an operation with no draws. He's just trying and trying and trying for his life. There's no other general like that. I think he sees the situation and decides that the odds are in his favor. The movie shows what happens over the course of roughly 9 hours. His plan wasn't very detailed. It was just to get rid of the static because he knew he was going to be kicked out. When things don't go as planned, he puts everything else aside. I don't think there was a country in that process. He made decisions that he wouldn't have made if he thought about the country. Jeon-do Kwang's faction had disagreements, but they were united. The opposing camp is divided, and they don't see eye to eye. The only person who tries to fight back is Lee Tae-sik, but even he is not united. If Lee Tae-sik had been a joint chief of staff instead of a defense commander, history might have changed completely. For 9 hours, they were trying to outmaneuver each other in complete urgency. And it was all about who could get their troops into Seoul first, and in the process, They were trying to get their troops into Seoul, and that's what a soldier does. As a soldier, your first priority is to protect your people. You don't care if the enemy is coming in. They're just doing it to save their own lives. I'm sure there were a lot of regular soldiers along the way. They were enlisted in South Korea because they had to. They would have been in that unit against their will, and they would have gone into Seoul and shot, because there was no other way to do it. In the movie, they're told to go, but did the soldiers have a choice? The average private wouldn't have had any choice, or even any credit. I wonder if the soldiers were just expendable. I wonder if it was right to have allies turn their guns on each other instead of enemies. I wonder if the soldiers who died in the process were treated any differently. The movie is quite long, 141 minutes, but I didn't get bored watching it. It's a very engaging and focused movie. There's a lot of information, but it doesn't seem like there's been a lot of historical verification of the events of 12/12. The cast is very strong and there are no breaks in the acting, even in the special appearances.